Good morning, and welcome to Pivot, Plan, and Reimagine. This is the first of a four-part series on strategic planning. Though I hope you guessed from the title, it is not necessarily a standard approach to planning, because how could it be? In the midst of a pandemic, financial uncertainty, social unrest, racial inequities, planning must look and feel different than our traditional perception of strategic planning, because we come at it from an abundance of opportunity, as you read in the words of Arundhati Roy. Over the course of the next 8 weeks, we will be exploring all the elements that go into looking at how you can build the scaffolding for a plan that is resilient enough for to give your organization the strength it needs, and yet versatile enough to stand the test of time. Each section will begin with a webinar on the particular subject matter, to be followed by a less formal Zoom discussion where we can discuss and answer questions about how you put what you've learned and discovered into practice. We will also be encouraging you to do a bit of homework in between so you can maximize what is being presented. Before we begin, let me introduce myself. I'm Sharon Danosky, president of Danosky Associates. I've been working in the nonprofit sector for almost 40 years and have dedicated my work to 3 areas: strategic planning, building strong boards, and raising money. 12 years ago, in 2008, I began my own business, Danosky Associates, to work with small and mid-sized nonprofits and help build their strength and capacities. And that work begins by looking strategically at where you are and where you want to go. I would very much like to thank and acknowledge Jackie Downing from the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven and Valerie Knight-DeGangi from the Valley Community Foundation. I am so impressed by the time and resources that these foundations and their staff devote to strengthening our sector, especially during such time of enormous need and uncertainty. Jackie, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you. And welcome to everyone. We're so glad that everyone is here. On behalf of the Valley Community Foundation and the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, I want to thank Sharon Danosky and her partner, Juanita, for making all of this possible, for making it so smooth. We listened very carefully to what the nonprofits were saying in the survey that was done by the Connecticut Alliance and FEO partners, and by other things that we've been hearing in the community as to what's needed next. And this was really a chance to look at, if you have a strategic plan, how does one pivot that in the modern times, in what we're facing now? And if you don't have a strategic plan, it's not the old process of, the SWOT analysis and then moving forward. So Sharon has a refreshing way to look at planning for your organization. And I think that's what we'll do over the next 8 weeks. I invite you to take advantage of the time of those check-in sessions in between. That's a place where you can go ask questions that you didn't think of when we first worked together. It's a place where you can do some brainstorming and roundtabling of the things that you're working on. So I would encourage you, if you can, just to check in at those meetings, as well as the content-rich sessions that Sharon will be presenting for us. So Sharon, I know you have a lot to get through, so I'll throw it back to you.
Thank you, Jackie. First, a few housekeeping details. Your mic should be muted and video camera should be off to prevent distractions. I think we're probably all getting tired of hearing this at this point. We all know that, but I will answer questions during and at the end of the webinar, and I will stay longer to address those questions if we can't get them in within the desired time. I do encourage you to attend the weeks in between because that's where you can probe more questions. If I cannot get to your question or your question requires more context, I invite you to email me at info@danosky.com and I will answer them offline. I will also be asking you to participate and share some of your experiences and your own observations during this webinar. And yes, you will receive a copy of the deck and the recording of today's session. And just like Jackie, I want to recognize Juanita Manning. Truly, she has been the woman behind the curtain today and each day to make this as smooth as it is. So thank you, Juanita. Now, if you could let me know who is joining us today and who is interested in how we go about planning. If you could just take the poll, I'd really appreciate it. All right. So quick poll, pretty much executive directors and board members make up the majority, and board members, I really thank you for taking the time to be on this, and executive directors as well. Goodness knows you have a lot on your plate. And so I also want to ask you a question. And if you could answer in the Q&A box, which is at either the top or the bottom of your screen. It's a lot easier for us to tally things in the Q&A box than it is in the chat box. So what do you want for the strategic plan you are envisioning at this point in time? Do any of you want to share your thoughts on what you're hoping to get out of these sessions, what you're hoping for your strategic plan, and what you're hoping, to begin thinking about as you move forward? As I mentioned earlier, I want to approach planning from an outside of a traditional framework, because very little in our world is traditional, and indeed, much of our world has been upended. So when we think about planning, we need to do it from the perspective of where we are today, where do we really want for our organizations to be in the future. To answer that as authentically as possible means getting out of our own way, looking at our organizations from the perspective of potential, of opportunity, from a perspective of abundance and not want, as a thriving organization and not one that just wants to survive. Arundhati Roy very much understands this opportunity, and indeed the challenges us to look at this time as a portal and to resist the temptation to wish to return to normality, because the normality that was our lives was full of want and injustice and inequities and an embattled environment. It has perpetuated the nonprofit starvation cycle, and with it woefully inadequate resources to meet enormous demands and little opportunity to create a better world. If the best you can hope for is to survive the circumstances you're in, then that is a failure of vision. I believe we can all do so much better and emerge with a renewed sense to bring about the change you are meant to create at this time. And I love how Harold said he wants to gain better insight into the future planning that we already have. Or Linda, hoping to ensure that strategic planning process we've already begun is as complete as possible. Someone says to achieve board buy-in and meet the needs of society today and in the future. You know, guide us to crafting an effective plan. That's what we want, is to really be able to create a future that is different, to get out of emergency mode and move forward with our organization in a way that is different and forward-looking. Thank you all, because those are the comments I was very much hoping to hear from you. There are some realities that we must acknowledge as we probe what we can do, and these realities form the backdrop against which we draft our strategies, our plans, our goals. It is up to us to meet the moment of this time. And none of these issues have been resolved or even close to resolution. So we must plan with the ground continuing to shift and heave beneath us. First is COVID-19, which became the catalyst for many of the other cascading issues. It laid bare the underbelly of racial disparities, from essential workers to healthcare to education. It has also created greater divisiveness and uncertainty. Even if a vaccine is developed, how will it be distributed and who will get it or even be willing to be vaccinated? The murder of George Floyd, the shooting of Jacob Blake, and the more than 100 days of protest in Portland released a pent-up anger and created an uncomfortable awakening for many white Americans, as we are forced to look at and hopefully reckon the systemic racism in our society and unresolved issues of slavery. The economic decline now looks as if it may be a K recovery. And if you look at the letter K, there will be those who will recover and even now are doing remarkably well. And then there will be the rest who will never experience a true recovery. This also makes us look hard at what we call essential workers, with teachers now being added to the ranks. These have also been identified as ALICE, a term coined by the United Ways to describe people who are just one paycheck away from losing everything, which unfortunately has already happened. And all of this has shown the widening disparities between the haves and the have-nots. What we know: the Monitor Institute by Deloitte published a great white paper about the impact of COVID-19 and other factors they titled An Event or an Era. How to access this document is listed at the end of the webinar. And this provides a discussion of resources for social sector decision-making in the context of COVID-19. Pulling from that resource, these are the things we know. This pandemic moves across and intersects the entire social service sector, and as such, interrupts or amplifies existing trends. You have already seen an increasing need for your services. More demand for food, the total upending of our education system, domestic violence, homelessness, health, the sustainable demand for PPEs. The need far outstrips the capacity of a single nonprofit organization to manage or the resources to manage them. With reduced capacity and resources, new alliances must form, and the sector will need to contract, and already is. La Piana Consulting printed the findings of a survey they recently took. Typically, they observe the prevalence of mergers to be 1% or less in any given year. Right now, 23% of organizations responding to their survey said they are considering mergers. Some of these have been contemplated well before COVID-19, but the coronavirus has accelerated this consolidation and will continue to do so. The survey is listed at the end of this webinar of how you can how you can look at it. The impact of the virus has been disproportionate for people of color, from health, economics, education, and more, period. Finally, people are experiencing differently. Connecticut is far different than Texas or what Florida is experiencing compared to what New York experienced months ago. Different states have treated this differently. In Connecticut, we seem to be in a bubble, except a couple of weeks ago, Danbury experienced a surge. And Danbury was where the virus first hit our state. Danbury, I might also mention, is the future home of the John Oliver Memorial Sewage Treatment Plant, for anyone who has been turned into the late night tiff between Danbury's Mayor Boughton and John Oliver. I thought I'd inject a little bit of humor and levity at this point. There are also many unknowns. While there are some who believe it will disappear soon, the World Health Organization felt it may be with us for another 2 years. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with either prediction, but it just points out the uncertainty we're dealing with. The same thing for the economy. There are sectors which are rebounding, some doing better than others, and many, such as the hospitality industry, which is tanking. And unemployment is still skirting the levels of the Great Recession of 2008. There is no consistency in terms of the government's response. Different states are taking different approaches, some working better than others, and the variations come during different time frames. And how strong is our safety net? It is as strong as the strongest or weakest among you, because we're all on this together. Sheltering at home has placed new demands on our technology and accelerated the use of many platforms. How many of you were regularly on Zoom calls before March 1? And moving to virtual platforms are shifting the operating models for many organizations, from all virtual programming to some kind of a hybrid model. Finally, we are uncertain about the levels of social cooperation. With a virus that can be spread through social interaction, our different ways of handling this causes different scenarios of managing the virus. We will see how disciplined we were over Labor Day in about 2 weeks. The other element influencing how we evaluate planning is the lens we are looking through. What is critical here is the intersection of key players in addressing the uncertainties and the outcomes we will achieve as we move through this crisis. How this intersection plays out at this specific point in time will play a role for many years. First, our funders. Philanthropy. Funders have been reacting and responding quickly, pivoting from their traditional models to try to get money where it is most needed, most urgently. Just look at the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven and the Valley Community Foundation. Now their staff and boards are asking, was our response effective? What else do we need to do and how quickly? And it isn't just responsiveness now, it's trying to proactively think about how else they can pivot if they can address systemic issues in the midst of the crisis and help the sector not just survive, but emerge stronger. It's such things as presenting this webinar to help you look at planning differently. Racial disparities is the second, and they have become powerfully obvious. The systemic outcomes are going to have far-reaching implications in terms of the ability of people to participate in the economic recovery. It will continue to have an impact on education and future jobs for a decade or more, and whether all Americans will be able to share in economic prosperity when it returns. And it will have an even greater impact in terms of how we view ourselves as a society and how we will heal emotionally as a country and as a people post-COVID-19. This is still playing out before our eyes with no clear sense of whether or not we can meet this moment. And yet, as a nonprofit organization, organization, it is essential that you talk about how you can meet this moment. And nonprofits, how many will survive and what services must you be addressing? How will you respond to racial inequities with 90% of executive directors and board leaders still being primarily white? As the crisis begins to fade and the community is redefined, the nonprofit landscape will have changed. New nonprofits will emerge, others will form stronger alliances, and others will fade. How will you define your future? In spite of all of this, I think we need to start with hope, not the Pollyanna kind, but a kind of audacious hope. And I pulled this quote from Rebecca Solnit. Ordinary life before the pandemic was already a catastrophe of desperation and exclusion for too many human beings, an environmental and climate catastrophe, an obscenity of inequality. It is too soon to know what will emerge from this emergency, but not too soon to start looking for chances to help decide it. It is, I believe, what many of us are preparing to do. So let's begin. We need to begin with vision. Now, please take a minute and picture the world you want to live in. Imagine it. What does that look like? What happens in that world? How are the people in that world? How do they treat each other? What does humanity look like? What does the earth and the world look like? If you could imagine this, take a minute, write it down, hold it in your mind, and please share it in the Q&A box. I hope a few of you will share the vision as you see it, so that we can all see it too. And while you are thinking of that, I'm going to share a quote by Donella Meadows, one of the architects and leading expert on systems thinking and systems change. If we haven't specified where we want to go, it is hard to set our compass, to muster enthusiasm, or to measure progress. But vision is not only missing almost entirely from our policy discussions, it is missing from our culture. We talk easily and endlessly about our frustrations, doubts, and complaints, but we speak only rarely, and sometimes with embarrassment, about our dreams and our values. So are any of you thinking and writing down your vision? It'd be great to share them. So think of the world you want to live in. Begin with your vision. And beyond what you are quickly writing today, I'm going to ask you to spend some time, when and where you do your best thinking, to pose this question to yourself and then reflect on it. And now I would like to pivot and ask about your vision for your organization and the people you serve. How many of you have a vision that really energizes everyone in your organization? While thinking about that, does it energize everyone from your employees to your board to the clients you serve? So half and half. Good for you. I think that's wonderful. Now, I want to ask you some other questions. And again, I want you to think about this and tally these up. Vision unites people. It unites employees. It unites board members. So let me ask a question about how vision functions in your organization. As I go through each of these questions, I want you to rate your responses on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest. Then I will ask you to total your scores in a poll. Number 1, people in your organization are passionate and enthusiastic about what the organization is doing and going. 1 to 5. Those who work here, including the board, okay. Well, I'm delighted that no one gave yourself a 0. And the majority, half of you gave yourself pretty high marks. And about 30% of you gave yourselves 2 or 3. The next question, those who work here, including the board, feel like they are all heading in the same direction. Those who work here, including the board, feel like they're all heading in the same direction. All right, a little bit more disparity here. Number 3, if asked, every person in your organization could give a 1 to 2 minute description of the organization's vision, mission, and how they're making that happen. All right. Marks going down a little bit, getting a little more complicated. The external world has a clear and compelling picture of our organization and what it stands for. The external world has a clear and compelling picture of our organization and what it stands for. Terrific, terrific. So the majority of you, it's kind of split between 3 and 4 with a little bit on either side outlying. And let me just get to the last question. Our vision mission positioned us well to deal with the ramifications that COVID-19 brought about. All right. So interesting. 26% number 2, 23% 3, 26% 4, and kind of equal 13% at either side. So thank you for doing that. And I do want to take a minute to read some of your visions. I envision a world where every child, family, woman has the opportunity to thrive regardless of their circumstances, whether it be from a crisis or life. They should have the tools and the support to succeed and lead a meaningful life. The past should not define their future. Thank you, Megan. And there's a couple of other. Joy, I see a world where people are working and recreating side by side, no matter what color or ethnicity. And Elaine says, a world at peace because justice prevails, where our shared bounty allows art, beauty, and culture to flourish. And Dan, you're stealing my thunder from a future slide, a world free from hunger. Thank you all for sharing that, for doing that. And my hope is by doing that, we begin to think and vision of the world we want and how we look at our vision statement. All planning must begin with a vision. What would the world look like if you were ultimately successful? What would happen in your community? Without vision, it is a tactical plan full of operating models and implementation procedures. I want you and your board to think about where you want to go. What do you want to be? A vision statement is the anchor point of any strategic plan. It outlines what an organization would like to ultimately achieve and gives purpose to the existence of the organization. This is the statement that defines what you are working toward. This is the statement that breathes life and enthusiasm into your organization. It is a rallying call and motivates everyone from employees, clients, board members to donors and people who have never met you before. Ultimately, your vision should be put into a statement which is concise and clearly defines your aspirational purpose. But as you develop it, be messy and invite lots of input. Your final vision should, of course, be ratified by your board. And don't sit in your office and write the vision statement for your organization. A shared vision is what makes strategy successful. So enjoy the visioning process. You need to spend time thinking about vision. Ideally, it comes from your board, and it's the board's responsibility to unite and the organization with a clear vision and mission for the organization. Here are some well-crafted vision statements. And here's kudos to you, Dan, because you had one of them. A humane society, a world without hunger, equality for everyone, a just world, I think, Elaine, that was yours, a just world without poverty, a world where no child goes to bed hungry. A vision is larger than the organization. It is aspirational. It talks about the kind of world you want to live in. A strong vision statement is a world without hunger. But before you write that sentence, imagine what that world would look like. That's vision. It is critical, as I mentioned, that your board is engaged in developing a vision. You might start by asking these few questions of your board. Number one, envision the world as you would like it to be. Picture the world from a perspective of abundance. Number two, in that world, how do your clients live? Envision their lives and how you would like to see it. One way of doing this is to take those sentences, send it to your board, ask them to think about it in advance, and then when you bring them back together, and if you're doing so virtually, you can turn them into breakout rooms and have 3 or 4 of them discuss their visions together, and then come back with the few words that most resonated with all in the group of what their vision should look like. Bring that together and then bring those words to life in your vision statement. You will find when you do that, there will be significant similarity. Then a couple of people can wordsmith it. Don't spend the time wordsmithing. Spend the time envisioning. Mission is different than vision. Mission is purpose, your reason for being. Why do you exist? Who do you serve? What are we working toward? Mission statements should inspire people by calling forth that sense of purpose. They should make clear when human needs, what human needs the organization serves or how it impacts the world. And I'm trying to get to some of your questions here. All right, so there are more shared statements, and I'm hoping we can capture these and maybe share them all with you, if possible, at the end. So if vision defines your aspiration for the world, mission defines your purpose or what you do to make that vision possible. For example, if your vision is a world without hunger, then your mission might be that everyone in your community has access to food. Or your mission might be to teach sustainable farming. Or your mission might be to provide access to sustainable farming in urban communities. Or plant community gardens where people are unable to access fresh produce. Or to cultivate communication connections and equitable access to quality food. All of these are different, but they play a significant role in creating a world without hunger. Each of those mission statements address the vision. What do you do to make your vision a reality? Your mission must align with your vision. It should accurately describe what you do to bring the reality closer to the vision. Note what you do, not how you do it, because the how can change and may pivot and change frequently, as it has for many of you during this pandemic. But what you do should be consistent with your mission, unless it is time to revisit your mission, because maybe what you were doing to make your vision come true no longer works the way it did a year, 5 years, or 10 years ago. And here is the question, and this question is with a great big Q. If you were founded today, at this exact moment in time, what would your mission be? Knowing what you know now, 6 months into a pandemic, how would you change your mission? How? This is a great question for a board discussion. And by the way, it's okay to change your mission, to adapt it to the real world today. Let me give you an example. Originally, the March of Dimes was based on raising funds door to door, hence the March of Dimes. Their purpose was to eradicate polio. And when the Salk vaccine was developed and administered to millions all over the world, the imperative to eradicate polio was gone. But there were still many debilitating childhood diseases. So the March of Dimes changed its mission to improve the health of babies by preventing birth defects, premature birth, and infant mortality. When you are looking at your mission, there should be a robust, energizing discussion. Don't wordsmith. That comes later. Instead, think about what you do. Just as you facilitate a vision discussion, facilitate the discussion around mission. As with vision, it is a board's responsibility to set and review the organization's mission, but that doesn't mean they do it in a vacuum. One way of discussing mission is through personal storytelling. Ask your board members and your staff to think about a time when your organization really nailed it. What were you doing and how it felt? Why did they feel that way? What was meaningful about that experience? Also, what could your organization do that would make your vision more of a reality for the people you are serving? Then step back and look. How does that compare with what you are or have been doing? In the discussion of your mission should also be a discussion of who you serve. Who do you currently serve and who are you meant to serve? Let's go back to our backdrop against which we are navigating these waters. The disparities caused by COVID-19, the fact that COVID-19 is hitting minorities much harder, essential workers and the huge toll it's placed on their families, racial inequities, realizing that many essential workers are also people of color, the impact of a hybrid model of education or remote learning, which is creating greater disparity by the moment, as people who are middle class or wealthier can create pods to help their children learn, and people who are poor cannot, or the lack of access or Wi-Fi or tablets, the number of people who have been or are being locked out of an economic recovery, or locked out of their homes, or don't have food, or experiencing more domestic violence, and racial injustice, Black Lives Matter, the struggle for equality, police brutality, The fact that 1 in 3 Americans today are facing some kind of anxiety disorder, even mild depression, that probably resonated with some people on this call. I know it does with me. If your organization in any way touches on any of these or other issues that aren't included here, how does your mission address them? This is also the time to have difficult conversations and to become a little uncomfortable, or a lot uncomfortable. I have been facilitating a number of discussions relative to mission, vision, and people served. I am finding that people at this point in time are willing to have these conversations. There is a more authentic voice that we are speaking with, and we need that authenticity to be heard in order to move forward and more ambitiously work to fulfill our missions. Have discussions about race and justice and inequities in the system, not just with your staff, but encourage it among your board. Many of you are doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work, or you have done so, or you are contemplating it. DEI work, though, isn't a one and done. It's not, okay, check that box. Your board needs to be comfortable with these difficult topics because many of the people you serve, and indeed for some of you, the very reason you are in existence is to address these difficult topics and provide services that will change people's lives. If you can't have the difficult conversations, then you can't have a good discussion about mission and the impact of your services. All it takes is raising the question thoughtfully, considerately, and people will begin to talk. The other thing that is critically important in doing this is to become comfortable with silence. When asking a question, let that question linger gently in the room until the first person speaks. Then the door will open. I'd like to ask you now, how many of you are engaged in these discussions right now? And if you'd like to share anything in addition to the poll, please do so in the Q&A. This is excellent. And I should have probably left space in between I am and I'm not, because this is not black and white, but 75% of you have begun engaging in these discussions, and they're rich discussions, and they're discussions that will end up leading to greater consideration of how to look at your mission and how to look at who you are serving. Discussions about your vision and your mission includes talking about your values. A discussion about values is always an interesting one. Often when I raise this question at a strategic planning retreat and ask board members to share with me the values that guide their decision-making process, I'm met with blank stares. And yet we all know what our personal values are, and I believe we also know the values of our organizations. But how do you define values? And just as we're talking about vision and mission, it is the consensus of this discussion that is so critical. What values do you share with your family or friends? When you are getting to know someone, what is there about that person? When you hear a story that touches you, why did it touch you? This is what defines values. To define values as part of the strategic planning process, think about those personal values and how you provide them as guiding principles when there is a board or a staff discussion or a decision to be made. They are your enduring, passionate, and distinctive core beliefs. They're your true north. Yet having led many retreats where we talked about values, people still have difficulty articulating core values for an organization. And Shirley shares with us that she's engaged in these discussions related to education and disengaged youth. And they are very challenging based on the silence, often in the rooms. Yeah, but in that silence is where this discussion begins to percolate. And what I am finding, Shirley, and for everyone else, that linger with the silence long enough and someone raises their hand, and then you can ask someone else or ask anyone, what do you feel about what that person said? And eventually the conversations will be able to merge. But it's critically important to be comfortable with the silence. So talking about defining values and silence, it's not easy. And doing it by committee is not necessarily recommended. But getting a sense from your board and your staff is definitely a good way of checking in. So I suggest asking the following questions. Have people, send these questions to your staff, send them to your board individually, and have people fill it out separately, and then come back together to see which values consistently rise to the top. And here are some of the prompt questions that you can think of. 1, why do people seek out your organization or refer others to you? What are the traits and values you look for, even if you aren't actively aware of it, in people when you're hiring them? Think of an instance or two when things haven't worked out and why. And what were the traits and values that were missing when things went wrong? When you promote people, why those people over others? When you really nailed something, once again, what kind of values and traits were coming through? What kind of nonprofit do you want to be in the future? I think this is probably a more reliable way of looking at values than shouting them out in a retreat. Then how do these align with your mission? Well, I acknowledge the discussion up to now has been somewhat esoteric. It is all leading up to what programs you offer. What are your core services? Because through your core services, you fulfill your mission. And I want to emphasize the word core. In some ways, this discussion follows the previous questions you've been asked to address. What is important is to understand your core services. When COVID-19 first hit and you first pivoted your services, those you pivoted, hopefully, were most likely your core services, the things you needed to provide. These are the services that are most strongly aligned with your mission. These are the services you are meant to provide. Most every organization has services that are not core services. These are the services that augment or supplement your core. Sometimes you offer them because they also attract funding. Sometimes because it really benefits those you serve, and it's easier to create them as a wraparound. But you should differentiate between the two. And then ask the question, like we did with mission, if you were founded today, what services would you be offering? If you were founded today, if you founded your mission today and you founded, what services would you be offering? Also take the time to critically evaluate the services you are offering and perhaps how you're providing them. As you have traveled on this journey, imagining your vision, reflecting on your mission, considering the people you need to be serving, you should spend time on evaluating your services. Are they sufficient the way they are? Should they be delivered differently? If so, how so? What services should be developed or considered to better reflect your mission or vision? Should any services be scaled back or eliminated? These are boldly truthful conversations that you need to have within your organization before any kind of plan can emerge. Services from the perspective of lived experience. This is an area where I think a lot of organizations struggle, integrating people with lived experience into your organization. Treating them as stakeholders, committee members, board members, listening to their perspectives. And yet it is so important. How has the pandemic and surrounding issues affected the primary constituents or clients of your organization? How has it changed their lives? Are there more people who need services? Are the people who most need services receiving them? Is how you are delivering the services the easiest or best way from the end user's perspective, from your client's perspective? Can people readily and virtually get to you? We will talk more about how to survey people with lived experiences further on in these planning webinars. But as you are reimagining your organization, this is perhaps the most important perspective. Finally, I would like to talk about differentiating core services from non-core services. You really don't need to do everything. I know there has been a period of welcoming and encouraging wraparound services. And there is a good argument for that, certainly. Every person you should serve should be considered as a whole and unique person and not as a recipient of partial services. That's absolutely true and imperative. But what I'm suggesting here is that you don't have to do it all yourself. If you are a homeless shelter, do you also need to provide meals? Or could you partner with a food bank or a culinary school to provide those services? I want to give you an example. In my community, there is a culinary school who's teaching culinary services to people who have been locked out of work and looking for an alternative career. The food in the warm weather is purchased or donated by local farms in the area. Every day, the students prepare meals, which are then served by the local soup kitchen. Fresh, locally produced meals. It's an ecosystem which supports each other. The soup kitchen doesn't have to teach cooking or provide the meals. They just have to provide the venue where people can come, and the culinary school doesn't have to run the soup kitchen. I think we need to think more in terms of symbiotic systems, natural partners, strategic alliances. It is a better way to resource services and develop sustainable, meaningful relationships. So when you are looking at core services and you're looking at those that are not core services, look at those services and say, how can we partner, meaningfully partner, strategically align with other organizations to provide a holistic approach to people who need services. So through this webinar today, I am asking you to reimagine your organization. It all begins with your vision, which is at the heart of your organization. From there, you move out with your mission, your purpose, the cognitive representation of your vision. Vision and mission is surrounded by your values, your guiding principles, or the soul of your organization. Then around these, you build your core services, the work you need and are meant to do. And finally, at the outer edges are the non-core services, the opportunity to form the alliances, which will create the community of support for the people you serve. Reimagining your organization, as I've said, begins with your vision, mission, the people you serve, and the values, which are your guiding principles. and a careful evaluation of your services. As you go through this process, you will begin to gain greater insight. As you step back from the day-to-day, a bigger picture comes into view, and so do the possibilities. This is what you are meant to do if you are an executive director. This is what you are meant to do if you are a board member. As leaders of an organization, you need to spend this time because this is the beginning of reimagining the organization you want to be for the future. We will send this deck and recording out today. Along with it, I will send you a list of questions, all of which were included in this presentation. These questions should form the basis of a retreat or discussion with both your staff and your board. Ask them to review the questions in advance and then convene via a virtual meeting. If it is a small group, you can go through each question asking everyone to share their answers. Record the responses. If it is a larger group, break them into smaller groups for discussion purposes, then bring them back together. Begin to get a sense of how your world and how your organization are intersecting and where the opportunities lie. And then next week at the Zoom meeting, we can discuss how to do that. If you try to do it with a small group, how did it work out? Did you have any of these conversations? Let's explore this more at the Zoom meeting next Thursday. And next time, we will discuss how to explore your organization's current status and potential opportunities. There's a lot of information here, and this work will take time and commitment from all aspects of the organization, but invest in the time. When you have completed this exploration, you will know what direction you need to head. This is the time to reimagine your organization. I opened with a quote by Arundhati Roy, and I am now closing with the second half of that quote. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks, and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight with it. These are some of the resources I have quoted to you in this plan, and I want you to have them at your disposal. Thank you for all you do, and I'd now like to open it up to questions. I will stay a little longer if there are additional questions, or please feel free to email me at info@danosky.com. Thank you again, and thank you all for all you are doing to ensure that we have a safety net, as stretched as I know it is becoming. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Val. Thank you to your foundations for all the support you are giving to all of us, and I wish you all well.
Thank you, Sharon, for all of this information and for the insight that you've given us and the thought-provoking insight. There's work to be done, and you've given us a good foundation to start that work that I know will happen over the next 8 weeks. You mentioned several times near the end of the presentation the work around strategic alliances and how organizations can reimagine themselves. We will be doing strategic alliance workshops in November. So when this series ends October 29th, following week, we'll be starting some work in strategic alliances. So folks can watch for that as the emails come out when we settle the dates and times.
Great, and I want to get to a couple of questions. So what if you can't do it with your board before you do it with the staff? Absolutely. You don't have to do the two of them together. They can kind of work, in isolation and then bring it all together. So whatever, doesn't matter which comes first. just starting it is really what is important. Can you reiterate the homework for next week? There was a lot there. So for next week, with this recording, Juanita, the infamous Juanita, one of these days she's going to pop up and say hi to you. Juanita is also going to send out the list of questions. I want you to look at those questions. If you can start doing some of these questions with your staff, that would be great. If not, I want to explore those questions, have you look at them, and have a discussion. Some of you will get to it and have a discussion about how it's working, or discussions about how you should do it, or discussions about how you might lead your board and staff in a retreat. So take a look at the questions. Take a look at all of the information here, and next week is really an opportunity to probe deeper into some of the issues we have here and to really bring about a lot of some questions that I know you're going to have, you know, the minute that we end this webinar, because that's always the way. As you think about it, you start thinking of the questions. So this is for next week. Be thinking, explore the material we presented here, look at that list of questions, and come ready to discuss and ask more questions. All right, I think we still have a couple more questions. We still have time. Would it be appropriate to complete this exercise at a scheduled staff meeting, or would more time need to be required? Great question, Shirley. If you're doing it at a staff meeting, send it out to your staff so that they can think about it in advance. It becomes a lot more meaningful discussion. If your staff meeting is 4 or 5 people of your management team, then you can have a discussion there. But if you have a staff meeting of 20 or 30 people, have them break into groups of 3 or 4 people and discuss among themselves the answers and come back with, you know, one real question on one real response on each one. That way it becomes a lot more easier to facilitate this. I can go into more of this detail next week, or you can try it with your staff, but do send the information out in advance. I think it's really beneficial if you can do that. All right, I don't see any more questions. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. I've really enjoyed being part of this and look forward to next week and the coming weeks to explore how we look at planning differently. Thank you. Have a great day. Be safe, be well, take care. Bye all.